Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining. We are once again coming back together here in May, picking up, continuing on with our discussion of the six perfections or the six paramitas. And so for those of you who have not participated in one of these one community gatherings before, and particularly for this series of teachings, I'll give a little, overview of what we've been going through up till now to give you some context for where this discussion kind of lands or where it sits within this path. So the topic tonight is something called the perfection of diligence. And so this is one of six so-called perfections or paramitas. And these six perfections or paramitas are six kinds of practices or six ways of practicing. And they are ways of practicing in something that is called Mahayana Buddhism or the Bodhisattva path. And so a Bodhisattva is a person who has kind of made a pledge of sorts to free all beings from suffering and bring them to enlightenment. And so that attitude or that intention of a Bodhisattva is something we call bodhicitta. Bodhicitta means the mind of enlightenment. So that's kind of the overall topic, is the idea of bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, and then how we might engage with that, or how we might actually do something about that intention. So we have this intention to free all beings from suffering and bring them to the state of enlightenment, and then practices that would actually help us be able to do that. So at the beginning, in the beginning of all of our more kind of traditional Buddhist teachings, we always ask an intention. And for this particular teaching, because it is framed within the context of the path of the Bodhisattva and the practices surrounding that, and the idea and the intention and practices of the mind of enlightenment of bodhicitta, I would encourage you to generate this attitude of bodhicitta. So I'll just give you a little something you could think for yourself, if you like it, if it sounds good to you. So one thing that, Namchak Community, this is my teacher right above me, that's his picture. And so he would always start a teaching saying more or less this. He would say, think for yourself, think I will listen to these teachings and put them into practice in order to bring all beings, to free all beings from suffering and bring them to the state of enlightenment. So I'll start with that intention. That's my intention. And I share that intention with you if you choose to participate in that. So now we have this attitude of bodhicitta. That is that intention, the intention to free all beings from suffering and bring them to the state of enlightenment. That is what we call aspirational bodhicitta, or the aspirational mind of enlightenment, because it's just a wish. Like, I wish to free beings, I wish to bring them to enlightenment. Then we have something called engaged bodhicitta, or bodhicitta in action, you could say. And that is the practice of the six perfections. So to come back around to what are those six perfections, we have the perfection of generosity, perfection of discipline, ethical discipline, you could call it, the perfection of patience. And now we move on to the perfection of diligence. Then fifth, we will have next month, we'll talk about the perfection of meditative concentration. And sixth, the perfection of wisdom. And so you might be first wondering, what is all this perfection stuff? Perfection in what sense? Or perfect by what standard? And so that is what would make a practice so-called perfect or a perfection. It might be helpful to think of this with some other ways that this word is translated to. So perfected in the sense of completed, but what is completed? So another way that this is translated, or a more literal rendering of the word parul du chimba in Tibetan, means which will take you to the other shore, meaning that it will bring you out of the samsaric cycle of suffering. And so what is it among these six aspects or six practices is it that will actually bring you out of suffering or bring you beyond suffering? So according to Buddhism, that is the perfection of wisdom. So that is the wisdom of what Buddhists call selflessness or emptiness, the lack of some kind of inherent or true identity of oneself or of phenomena. And so with that wisdom, then all of these other practices of generosity, ethical discipline, patience, diligence, and meditative concentration become perfect or perfected, or a perfection or a paramita. So it is, from a certain perspective, all of the first five of the six perfections are steps, are kind of They are the fundamentals, you could say, or the building blocks upon which you would ultimately be able to generate that perfection of wisdom. And by a strict rendering, the other first 5 only become perfections once you have actually realized or generated that level of wisdom. So for now, we might practice generosity, and we do practice it, and we do try to practice it in accordance with these ideas of bodhicitta, with the intention to free others from suffering, bring them to the state of enlightenment, and so forth. We do our best to, you could say, at least intellectually understand and start to apply the teachings of selflessness and so forth. But right now, we have not perfected that, you could say. So even our practice of generosity is we could say, like an approximation or working towards becoming perfected. And we are practicing within the scope of, or the realm of, or the context of the perfections. But it's only when we actually realize that ultimate wisdom that it becomes what you could call authentic perfection of generosity. So there's a specific order in which these paramitas or perfections are placed. They are not just random, but they actually build upon each other. So they say that one actually serves as the cause of the next. In another way, they talk about that the early ones are easier and a little bit more obvious or coarse in their way that they're practiced, while the subsequent ones are a little bit more difficult and more subtle in the way that you would approach or understand them. So for example, generosity could be something as simple as giving someone $5. It could be as simple as helping someone carry a box. Could be anything like that. It's quite an obvious and outer level type of practice. But even that, in terms of the perfection of generosity, it's said that to be a practice of the perfections, it not only needs that wisdom, but it also has to serve as an antidote to its contrary force. So if generosity, what is the contrary force to generosity? It's greediness or covetousness, grasping. So your act of generosity should also serve to counter your grasping, your greed, your attachments. And so when your attachment is loosened, it's easier to practice ethics, because most of our what you might call a corruption or immoral or something like that, bad ethical behavior, comes because we're attached to something. Like, for example, if I were to cheat on my partner, it's because of attachment or lust towards someone else. If I were to steal, it's because of attachment to something that I want. It's because of my desire, my unchecked desire. So as I begin to loosen my grips of my attachments through my practice of generosity, it actually becomes easier for me to actually develop the perfection of ethical discipline. Then the opposite of ethical discipline, or the contrary force of ethical discipline, is what you might call unchecked behavior or unrestrained behavior, just acting kind of haphazardly and in a way that's potentially harmful. And so when you start to tame that, and you start to tame, you practice, for example, like the 10 virtues and the 10 non-virtues. Some of those are physical and verbal, and some of those are mental. So like in terms of the 10 non-virtues, the ones that are mental, one of those is harmful intention. And so when you overcome or tame your harmful intention, it becomes easier to practice patience. And so you're less attached to being right. You're less attached to possessions. You're less attached to the objects of your desire through generosity. You tame some of those kind of less friendly states of mind, such as covetousness and harmful intention and wrong view and so forth, through the practice of ethics. And then that makes it easier to practice patience, because patience then is from one perspective, it is the power that counters or acts to suppress or to overcome anger. From another perspective, you can think of the perfection of patience as an undisturbed mind. And so when we talked last month, and if you'd like to follow up after this, there's a video of this, of last month's talk on the perfection of patience. It's not just being angry, but biting your tongue and not saying anything, or not doing something physical, like to get back at that person, but it is kind of a practice of recontextualizing the whole situation, which might normally provoke anger, and to see it in a new light. So there are a lot of techniques that we went over. I'm not going to get into detail about that, but I can give you like the simplest one is that for a person who is committed to this path of the bodhisattva, of this path of enlightenment, we have to a certain extent kind of committed ourselves towards wishing for the welfare and the benefit of others. So we're practicing, love and compassion for others. And love and compassion are in direct contradiction to being angry at someone or wanting to harm someone. So if you are having this complete intention to wish for the liberation and freedom from suffering and enlightenment of this other person, and you really have that love for them in terms of wishing them for happiness, to have happiness and the causes of happiness, be free of suffering and the causes of suffering, then they're really committed to that. You can't really be angry at them. You will see their mistaken actions through maybe a different lens of seeing that they were driven through their own afflictive emotions, their own ignorance and so forth. And rather than being angry, actually have compassion for them. So that's just one, small point. And that is, I know that sounds quite challenging. We do get angry, but there are a lot of techniques, and that's just one technique. That's like one way of reframing a scenario that might provoke anger into a context where it might actually deepen your practice of love and compassion. So there are many more aspects to that you could refer back to last month's talk, or if you want some good reading, I've been mostly basing these lectures on Gampopa's Ornament of Precious Liberation. I don't know if you can read that, but Jessica will type it up in the chat there. So Gampopa is one of the founding kind of main teachers of the Kagyupa lineage. Closest disciple, one of the closest disciples of Milarepa. Oh, still open, right? Sorry, my computer did some weird stuff. Okay. And this is, in my opinion, one of the most straightforward and best texts for studying the perfections and bodhicitta. There are other texts which are more common. Like, for example, almost everyone studies Shantideva's Way of the Bodhisattva, and there are a million commentaries to that. And we also recommend one commentary to that in Namchak a lot, but it's highly technical. It gets into a lot of really technical Buddhist jargon and really technical philosophical stuff that for some people is a little overwhelming to read. And I just find this text like a little bit more simple and straightforward, but still very much to the point, still covering everything that needs to be covered, but with a little bit less of the academic edge. So anyway, if you wanted to read this text, it's a great synopsis of the perfections. So anyway, so then that's kind of covers where the first few perfections up to the point where we are now on the fourth, which is the perfection of diligence. So diligence now is, so we use the word diligence. Sometimes we use the word joyful effort. And the reason that some people translate it as joyful effort is because the real kind of more deeper meaning of diligence, according to Buddhist philosophy, is actually enthusiasm. It's joyful effort. So, the word that we translate from Tibetan texts into English is literally diligence. But there's a famous quote from Shantideva in The Way of the Bodhisattva where he says, "What is diligence? It's being enthusiastic about wholesome or virtuous practices." So, from that perspective, you can kind of see how he's reframing diligence, not just as kind of stubbornly or persistently kind of pushing yourself to do something that you think is right, but actually trying to become enthusiastic about it. If you're enthusiastic about something, you don't have to force yourself to do it. For example, if you're enthusiastic about your meditation practice, you'll get up in the morning and be excited to do it. Just like if you were getting up in the morning and you were excited to go on a trip with your family, or you're excited to go on that bike ride with your friends, or whatever your morning activity might be. And the problem, the reason why I think a lot of us have trouble getting into that rhythm of daily practice is because we haven't really gotten the enthusiasm yet. And that's kind of where this kind of idea of diligence as enthusiasm, I find really helpful. So rather than just trying to convince yourself that you should do it, you should convince yourself of the benefits of it, and then maybe you'll get some more enthusiasm, So that's kind of the approach of a lot of this text. So coming back to Gampopa's actual text, then he gives a lot of categories at the beginning, like a lot of Tibetan texts and also classical Indian Buddhist texts. You'll read it and they'll give a really huge outline. I'll say the perfection of diligence is summarized as sevenfold, blah, 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 go into all these different categories. I'm going to not go into too much of that because what often happens at these things is people, everyone kind of wants to write down every single word and then it just becomes confusing. So I think I should just kind of cover the main points without saying there are 7 points and in the 7 points, there's 4 subpoints and all that kind of stuff. It just, especially in this short of a timeline, it becomes a mess. So let's just talk. Almost every chapter in this book about the perfection starts off with talking about the drawbacks on the absence or the drawbacks of not having diligence and the advantages of having diligence. So those are the first 2 sections of this text. So now in the text, it says that, I'm just going to read a short passage here and then we'll talk about it a little bit. To explain the first, the reflections on the drawbacks of its absence, its meaning diligence, and the benefits of its practice, even though possessing the qualities of generosity and so forth, that's talking about the other perfections. A person devoid of diligence will waste their time. When time is wasted, virtue is not accomplished, there is no ability to benefit others, and enlightenment is not attained. So even if you have done some practice of generosity and some practice of ethical discipline, of patience, of meditative concentration, and trying to develop wisdom through studying text or vipassana, analytical type of meditations and so forth, if you don't have diligence, then those things are going to be kind of powerless. If you're not actually applying yourself diligently and with enthusiasm toward developing those, then you're not going to make any progress in them. Just understanding what diligence is, or just understanding what wisdom is, or having an intellectual understanding of selflessness isn't going to get you enlightened. It's diligent practice of those things, which is what's going to lead you actually towards enlightenment. So that's the point here. So it says, possession of diligence, the opposite of wasting time. And another thing that's a little bit interesting here, that this translator has chosen to translate the word laziness as wasting time. But the word literally is laziness. And I think maybe he's just trying to avoid like a kind of maybe negative kind of word, or a word that we have like negative associations with. But anyway, saying diligence is the opposite of laziness is what the author's saying, Gampopa. And, as he goes through in the text, he talks about how about 3 kinds of laziness and how to overcome those 3 kinds of laziness. So we're going to get into that in a minute. So there are a lot of just quotes from texts here, and I don't feel like it's necessarily all that helpful to just read like 17 quotes from different texts and say that this author said this, and in this sutra, the Buddha said this, and so forth. But I'll read a few of these things just for a basis for conversation here. So basically, these are just kind of like phrases for diligence. So in the Ornament of Mahayana Sutras, it says, through diligence, someone goes beyond the perishable composite and is liberated. The perishable composite is a technical Buddhist term, which means it's sometimes also translated as the view of the transitory collection. And what that means, it's a technical term, is that your idea of a self or yourself, your I, is kind of just an idea or an imputation of your mind, which is based upon a bunch of other things which themselves are constantly changing. They are perishable or transitory. So like your body is one of those things. It's constantly changing. It's never the same. Like your body of 2 years ago is not your body now, and so forth. And if you go deeper into that, your body of 1 millisecond ago is not your body now. Like it's gone. It's in the past. It's no longer exists in terms of subtle impermanence and so forth. So it's saying basically that your body is constantly changing, but you identify it as me. Your mind is constantly changing, but you identify it as me. Your feelings of likes and dislikes and neutrality and so forth are constantly changing, but you still identify them as me. Your perceptions of this is this and that's that are constantly changing, yet you still identify them as me. And your emotional states are constantly changing, but you still identify them as me. So that's what is the view of the transitory collection, is that you believe that there's some truly existing kind of permanent, singular, independently existing I or me. But when you look for that, all you find are these things that are constantly changing. that never stay still for a moment. So what he's saying here is through diligence, someone goes beyond the perishable composite and is liberated. The way to be liberated, according to Buddhism, is to overcome that idea or that belief that there is some enduring, truly existing I, other than just these things that you're basing that idea on. And so that's what he's saying here. If you have diligence, you'll be able to overcome that, and that is what liberates you. So again, in that same text, just continuing on, it says that you'll attain Buddhahood. Through diligence, one will become supremely enlightened as a Buddha. So then again, in this Questions of Sagaramati Sutra, he says, the Buddha says, ultimately, totally pure, perfect enlightenment is not that difficult for people who practice diligence. Why is this, Sagaramati? Whoever has diligence has enlightenment. Basically, all he's saying is that it's not that hard to get enlightened if you just keep at it, if you're enthusiastic about it. And so that's the problem, is people don't usually follow through. They don't follow through, so they don't actually make it there. At another point in Shantideva's Way of the Bodhisattva, he says, there's nothing in the world that isn't easy if you just get used to it. And that's what we're doing when we practice meditation. You know, you're just keeping at it, keeping at it, keeping at it, keeping at it. It becomes easy. It becomes familiar. So anyway, that's the idea here. So we can move on a little bit to the kinds of laziness. So actually, let's stop here for a minute and see how this is landing for people. I know we haven't said that much yet. Basically, all we're saying is if you're diligent, you'll get where you want to go, you know, and if your path is the path to enlightenment, the path of the Bodhisattva, then it's going to get you there. It's going to get you to enlightenment. And all this is saying right now is trying to hype you up a little bit, trying to like make you want to get enthusiastic, trying to make you want to develop diligence. You know what I mean? So just giving these kind of things or these kind of examples, some quotes, if you do this, if you get diligent, then you'll get enlightened. You know, it's just like basically letting us know, or making us want to engage in the practice. That's how every other chapter went too. If you have patience, then this and that will happen. If you practice ethical discipline, you'll get this and that benefit, whatever. Every chapter has followed the same kind of outline. All right, so let's just move forward then, and we'll see how things go here when we get into the 3 kinds of laziness. And so here we have 3 kinds, and so those are wasting time or laziness as mere idleness, just not wanting to do anything, basically. Wasting time or laziness as underestimating your potential or putting yourself down, thinking you're not good enough or you couldn't ever actually do something like that. And then the third one is wasting time or laziness in the form of lowly pursuits. So we'll talk about what that means, but basically lowly pursuits means doing things that don't actually need to be done or something like that. So in the literal translation, you could call it bad activities, but bad's a pretty loaded word. So we'll get into a little bit more about what that means here in a second. So wasting time as idleness means being attached to the pleasures of letting the mind drift through sleep, idling in bed, and lounging around. These are to be given up. Why give them up? Because there is no time for such things in this life. It is said, this is a quote from a sutra, monks, your cognition is dim, your life will be cut off, and your life force will be lost. Even the Buddha's doctrine will disappear for certain. Why would you not practice with diligence and unflinching discipline? The Guide to the Bodhisattva's Life also says, while death is swiftly encroaching, I must gather the accumulations. So gather the accumulations is just another way of saying practice virtue and generate wisdom, basically. But further in that text from Shantideva in the Way of the Bodhisattva, he talks quite a lot in that text about how it's a really unrealistic notion to think that we're going to live long enough to fulfill all the dreams that we have for ourselves, especially if we're not actually practicing diligently towards those goals. So he gives a lot of examples. One of the main examples is, and this is common in a lot of Buddhist texts, to talk about how stupid cow or buffaloes are or something like that. And so, you know, he gives an example in the Way of the Bodhisattva where he says, it's like if you were a buffalo and you're in basically the slaughterhouse or a yard, and you know that the other buffalo are being killed, but you still just lay there and you don't fight back. You don't even try and escape. You know, basically that's what Shantideva says all of us are. All of us are just like a person who's waiting around to die and not actually doing anything that would actually be ultimately beneficial for ourselves. So further on here, he says again, it says, at death, even if you were to stop wasting time, what's the point? It's too late. So a lot of people get close to death and then they start to regret all the things that they wanted to do with their life and never actually accomplished. So basically saying, don't wait that long, like get started now, whatever it is that is your ultimate pursuit. And in this context, that is these practices of the six perfections, or your spiritual practice, saying, don't put it off until it's too late. We could die at any time. So it goes into a lot further discussion of that in the way of the Bodhisattva about how death is certain, but the time of death is uncertain. So it's for sure, all of us are going to die at some point, and we have no confidence at all that we're going to live another 5 years or even until tomorrow, And so if that's the case, then we really need to prioritize, reprioritize, I guess, all the things that we do with our time and see what is actually the most important. And so for Shantideva and for Gampopa, and for the Buddha, they would say that the most important thing is this practice of Dharma. And the reason why they would say that, one big part of this is, I guess it's not 100% dependent upon, but it is largely dependent on in a culture or in a world where you believe that death's not the end, then what's the best thing that you could do with your time? It is to prepare for your death. So if you are, if you don't believe there's anything after death, I think that even the general idea of diligence is still very appropriate. Even diligence in terms of Dharma may be appropriate. It depends upon how you look at it. But I think from this perspective, they're mainly talking about, they say, like, at the time of death, the most important thing that you can carry with you is whatever kind of progress you've made on your spiritual path up to that point, because nothing else that you've made in this life is of any benefit. Your friends and family can't help you when you die at the actual moment of death, when you're becoming dead. That's a strange way of saying that. Sorry. But anyway, none of the money or possessions that you had, you can't carry them with you. Basically, you just have to go alone, naked and empty-handed. And the only thing that you carry with you is whatever kind of force of virtue or positive kind of spiritual progress that you've made, and elimination of whatever kind of negativity that you had accumulated up before that point, trying to eliminate that. And then you're going to have to live with the results of that post-death, you would say. And so, from this perspective, if you believe that is what's going to happen, that there is still something after death, the thing of the most, highest priority would be to prepare yourself for that. So it says, you may feel falsely confident thinking that somehow death will not happen before you've completed your accumulation of virtue. And that is an unreliable notion. As it is said, it's wrong to feel so confident that my death will not wait for me to finish the things that I have to do. As far as this ephemeral life is concerned, it matters not whether I'm sick or healthy. So Drew asked, I don't want to muddy things, but can we discuss diligence versus striving, ego, intention? Yeah, sure. So diligence, first of all, there are a few things to unpack there. For one, from one perspective, diligence is this enthusiasm. I will say that also in certain times of a Dharma practice, you have to just believe that there's a result, have trust that the path works, and that the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and our teachers and so forth have traversed those paths. And then if we do it, it should work too. And sometimes the enthusiasm doesn't come, and we do have to actually just strive. We have to kind of push ourselves. The enthusiasm's not always there. And so this is an encouragement for us to generate that enthusiasm, and hopefully the enthusiasm will be the main driving force, not just a stubborn and persistent kind of forcing ourselves to do things. But there are going to be times, like Namchak Rinpoche in his meditation teachings, he often talks about this, that in the early stages of meditation, it can feel like your thoughts are just overwhelmingly powerful. And it's hard to feel enthusiastic about meditation practice in those moments. So it's but it's really important to think about the benefits of meditation, the faults of not meditating, the benefits of the path as a greater whole, not necessarily just that particular type of meditation, and kind of convince yourself to keep moving forward, even though it seems really hard. And so, there's a certain perspective that there is kind of this enthusiasm or this joy and virtue that it itself is going to drive you forward. And that's a nice thought, but it's, not the entire story. There does still have to be like some enthusiasm that gets you going, and you have to still have the wish to accomplish it to keep you moving. And in terms of striving and ego, of course, there is still, as long as you haven't overcome your grasping or fixation, your belief in this independently existing I, then that's still that I that's driving you forward to practice. That's just a matter of fact. Everything that we do is driven by a sense of I and of some kind of belief, even that enlightenment is real. Like, for example, in Shantideva's Way of the Bodhisattva, this is a kind of a technical philosophical point, but he says, the belief that there is a result is ignorant, but you shouldn't get rid of it yet. So let me explain what that means. Your idea that there even is a thing called enlightenment is still just an idea in your mind. And on a certain level, when you're getting into the deeper understanding of wisdom and the wisdom of emptiness and what that mind that realizes emptiness is, that mind that realizes emptiness doesn't believe in some truly existing, permanent, independently existent thing called enlightenment. But that's how our minds are thinking about it right now. We still believe there's some real thing that me as a real being can attain some real enlightenment. And what Shantideva is saying is that doesn't even exist. Yeah, of course there is, on a relative level, there is something called enlightenment. And it is a liberation from suffering. It is a state of all-knowing wisdom, spontaneous love and compassion, that kind of thing. But our belief in it is still driven by fixation, this kind of dualistic grasping. So your question about, striving and ego to a certain extent, from one perspective, if you're speaking about like the ultimate truth, on the ultimate truth, there is no self. We don't realize that, so we believe there's a self. And as long as we're still acting in the world with a sense of self, we have not overcome that through wisdom. Everything we're doing is based on striving and ego to a certain extent. So I think that the fine point about striving and ego, and whether it's driven by ego or not, is based in your intention. So from a certain perspective, no matter what you do, is still dualistic. It's still with a sense of, I am going to attain this thing for the benefit of these guys over here who are suffering. And from a perspective of that wisdom of emptiness or non-dual state, there's no such thing as a truly existing me, a state of enlightenment, a being who is suffering, or some suffering to free them from. But relatively, that's all happening. So on one level, everything that we're doing is based still in this belief that there's an I, so it's still ego-based. There is an I who's doing this stuff for you. I'm going to free you. But as long as that's tempered by the attitude of bodhicitta, of the intention to liberate all beings from suffering and bring them to the state of enlightenment, then it is entirely for the benefit of others. So it's not ego in the sense of wishing better for me or prioritizing me over you. It is ego from the sense that I believe there's an I who's doing this whole process. Does that make sense? I know I'm speaking in circles a little bit because the question begs the question, your question kind of begs the question that as soon as you start talking about ego in Buddhism, there's a certain sense of everything you're doing is ego or is still based in a belief in I. But on a certain extent, that's tempered by our altruistic intention of bodhicitta. Does that make sense? Sorry, that was like a kind of talking in circles a little bit. So I hope that was clear. And if it's not, please ask a question. Not just you, Drew, anybody. Yeah, and we'll have lots of time for more Q&A towards the end of the session too. So I'll just move ahead then. And if anything pops up for people, just throw it in the chat or just put your hand up. There's a place somewhere that you can like put your hand up and it'll show a little emoji. Okay. So basically what we're talking about is if you are in this state of laziness as idleness. So laziness as idleness means kind of just not wanting to do anything, being attached to comfort, being attached to the couch, to your creature comforts, that kind of thing. Oh, I don't want to meditate this morning because my bed feels really good and it's really comfortable and I'm having such nice sleep. Or I don't want to get off the couch in the middle of my Netflix show to do an evening session of meditation. The antidote for these types of things, I mean, I'm just giving very practical things that all of us do. I'm well aware that I do these things too. I'm sure that you guys do it too. You're doing things which are kind of what you would say like merely for the sake of comfort. And so if you're in that state and you're trying to kind of generate some enthusiasm about the practice, then the first thing to think about is the uncertainty of the time of death. Death is certain. The time of death is uncertain. So if that's the case, we have all these lofty goals like freeing beings from suffering, getting enlightened. Even if we don't go that far with our intention, if our intention is to make some progress, some genuine like progress in our mental health or in our spiritual path, whatever that may be, isn't that of a higher priority than sitting on the couch and being comfortable, or having that second glass of wine, or watching that other episode of your TV show? That's basically what it's talking about, essentially. So then he says, well, then if that's the case, how do I eliminate, or how do I overcome this laziness as idleness? And in the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, he says, you should relinquish it as you would react to a snake that has slithered on your lap, or if your hair were on fire. So immediately, like right now, don't waste time. Don't plan it for the future. Don't say, okay, well, I'll finish this show and then do it after that, or just one more, or just another half an hour in bed. Saying do it right now, as if your hair were on fire. You would run to the water like right now. So he says, just as you would hurriedly jump up if a snake came onto your lap, so when sleep and idleness come along, swiftly counteract them. So when you're feeling that attachment to sleeping more, when you're feeling that desire just for that kind of comfort, do something about it right now. Like, shift that attitude now, because deciding you're going to do it in the future, we've been doing that for the last however many years we think we've been supposedly practicing some kind of spiritual path. All of us do that. And when I say all of us, I'm talking about myself too. I'm not pointing fingers at you. All of us have been, I've been practicing for over 20 years, and I would have made so much more progress if I were really taking this seriously, So in a letter to a friend, this is a text from Nagarjuna. He says, if your hair or clothes suddenly catch fire, you do everything possible to put out the blaze. Strive just as much to extinguish future uncontrolled rebirth. Nothing else is important as that. So this is, again, speaking from the perspective of, past and future lives. So he says that, in the traditional Buddhist framework, what attaining liberation is not just liberation from a current or temporary state of suffering, like right now, like some kind of discomfortable or uncomfortable state, but it is to stop this whole cycle, to stop, in terms of past and future lives, or in terms of a process of habituation. From a certain perspective, it comes back to a certain type of fixation, this fixation on the so-called truly existing self. And that so-called truly existing self, as long as you're acting within the network of that belief system, you're creating habitual patterns which are going to repeat that type of experience. This is the process of karma. And so karma is driven by the belief in a self. And as long as there is a belief in a self, you continue creating karma. And karma are the habitual patterns that keep you in this cycle, essentially. And so what he's saying is, if just as if your hair or clothes caught on fire, you should strive just as hard to put out or to eliminate this cycle, or stop this cycle, as you would trying to put your hair out if it were on fire. So now we're going to talk about the second. Oh, wait. By that definition, can't idleness also be seen as consciously seeking calm? What one person calls idleness, be called another as seeking. By that definition, can't idleness also be seen as consciously seeking calm? Yes, but in this context, we're talking about idleness just as more like a laziness type of comfort, not like the comfort of overcoming the state of suffering. Or I don't know exactly what you mean, Donna. If you're speaking consciously seeking calm in terms of the calm that we seek through meditation, from one perspective, mere calm from meditation, as in like calm abiding, shamatha meditation, in Buddhism is never seen as an end in and of itself. It's only a technique that would enable you to generate the insight or the wisdom of emptiness, which then would stop this whole process of samsaric rebirth. So I'm not exactly sure if you could clarify if that doesn't answer your question. I mean, because, us consciously seeking calm in a certain sense in the Buddhist tradition is, there is the ultimate calm in terms of the actual state of enlightenment. And I'm not sure if that's what you mean. So maybe if you could clarify a little bit, we could talk about it more. Okay, great. Thanks, Donna. And then Carol said, sleep isn't just comfort. Sleep is essential for good health. I 100% agree with you. And I don't think that's what they're talking about. They're not saying don't sleep, just meditate 24 hours a day. I don't think the Buddha never said that. I just said, I don't think the Buddha never said that, which is really terrible, grammatically terrible sentence, but I don't think the Buddha ever said that. What I'm talking about and what we're talking about here is you've already slept 8 hours and you're just laying around for another 2 hours in their bed looking at Instagram. And, that's more what I'm talking about. Or, the idleness of being they'd also it's not just sleep in the text. They say how comfortable your pillow is, how comfortable your bed is, that you just don't want to get up, that kind of thing. I think certainly in all of the traditions that I've ever studied in, they definitely emphasize the necessity of good sleep. And, that would be another reason, if you were, taking this seriously, to maybe shift your schedule so that you're getting good sleep, but avoiding the late night activities that keep you up all night doing somewhat meaningless things, so that you can get the good sleep and still have a successful practice. So we'll get to that in a minute, because that's one of the other kinds of laziness, is the laziness of being attached to kind of meaningless pursuits, or I forget, lowly pursuits as it's translated in this book. So the next one, which is really, really important, and I find it really especially pertinent in the West, is laziness as underestimating potential. And so sometimes this is translated as self-deprecation, but basically just thinking that you're not good enough or you're not capable. So it says it refers to a defeatist attitude whereby you feel, how could a lowly person like me ever achieve enlightenment, even if I made great efforts? Such discouragement is unnecessary. In fact, the waste of potential caused by such an attitude needs to be annihilated. Those who wonder why such discouragement is unnecessary should take heart from the scripture that says, if they develop the power of diligence, even bees, flies, mosquitoes, or any insect whatsoever will achieve enlightenment so hard to attain. That being the case, how could one like me, born a human and knowing what's beneficial and what is harmful, not achieve enlightenment, provided that I do not abandon the bodhisattva conduct? So this is a quote from Shantideva in The Way of the Bodhisattva. Basically what he's saying is that anyone, no matter how lowly they were born, would be able to attain enlightenment if they were just diligent. And so he's saying, of course, someone like me, I was born as a human in a situation where I know what's right and wrong. I know what's helpful and harmful. Of course I could do it. Anyone could do it. Even people who don't have those freedoms could do it. So of course, someone like me who does have those freedoms could do it. And so, this is especially pertinent. And this is another side point to this. He just speaks about, of course, because I'm a human or whatever, I'm a human who knows right from wrong. But in the West, I feel like one thing that happens a lot is that a lot of our teachers are monks and nuns or some yogis who spend 20 years in a cave or something like that. And so we think, well, I'll never have the chance to do that, so why should I even try? That kind of thing. And that attitude comes up a lot as well. And I find that, just as, what do I want to say? Just as unnecessary of a thought, and also unrealistic, that people in their day-to-day life, just through doing some practice, even if you don't get enlightened, you can still make huge leaps and bounds forward in terms of your kind of spiritual development and transformation. And if you do apply diligence, even if you don't have a ton of time, but you do make it a priority in your life, there is no doubt that it's very possible you could even attain enlightenment in this lifetime if you follow the more advanced practices that are found within like the tantric tradition of Buddhism. Right now we're just talking about Buddhism in general, but if you talk about the Namchak tradition, like what is the Namchak tradition specifically? Namchak tradition is not just some organization that teaches like general Buddhism classes or some mindfulness courses or something. It's some of the, most profound, deepest, innermost secret kind of teachings of tantric Buddhism are what's called Namchak. It's like the real specific feature of what makes Namchak is that, very high level kind of, it's a subsect of the Nyingmapa school. But anyway, it's a very particular set of teachings and methods from one particular Tibetan lineage, which claim and profess to bring enlightenment in a single lifetime. And I fully believe that if you really were to put that into practice with diligence. And so, through our Namchak Foundation organization and through these kind of teachings and things, if you were to go deeper into those practices and follow through, you will have access to all of those highest and most profound teachings, like the exact same teachings that Tukul Rinpoche, our spiritual director, and Namchak Rinpoche would give to monks and nuns in a very deep many-year retreat, or someone in lifelong retreat in a cave. You will get those identical teachings, not a dumbed down, watered down version, like the exact same teachings from them if you do the work. So I'm just letting you know that even though this is a more general talk, all of those teachings are available, accessible, even doable by people like us. We can do those practices. I know a lot of Westerners who are doing those highest of the highest level practices, innermost kind of secret levels of practices, and gaining the results, And I know that because I translate for these lamas, and I have to hear all the personal interviews of all these students. And I know that people are really doing it. So just an encouragement that, just because we're not monks or nuns, just because we can't spend our lives in a cave, doesn't mean we can't practice and attain the results. So that was just my blah of encouragement because from my experience. Okay. The next one, this one is maybe triply important for us in the West, and that is laziness through lowly pursuits. I feel like back in the day of the Buddha and of Shantideva and Gampopa and all of these guys who wrote all these books that we're basing these teachings on, they only had so many things to be distracted by, like some person that they're attracted to or doing some business or something. Man, we've got the internet. This is maybe the worst thing that ever happened to the attention span of a human. Don't you think? I mean, seriously, social media, instant access to like any kind of TV, movie, shopping, pornography, like all of the things that are just pulling at your senses and pulling at your mind and wanting you to engage are there at the push of a button. It's crazy. And they're going to talk about, here it says wasting time through lowly pursuits. They only give a few examples here, but I think this is very obvious to us in the West, what this could mean. But it says it means involvement in non-virtuous actions such as overcoming enemies, amassing possessions, and the like. Those are very real causes of suffering, and they are to be abandoned. So, yeah, just buying stuff all the time. For what? Seriously. Like, do you need a 5th pair of jeans or like a 17th pair of boots? I mean, I'm talking about myself right now. Jessica knows I have a bunch of shoes. It's just totally stupid. But anyway, I said it and Jessica laughed so loud. So anyway, yeah, I'm being serious though, that these things, what's the point? And wasting time, being totally obsessed, I know for myself, and I know a lot of people who do this, you want to buy one thing that you actually do need, but you spend like a month shopping around 18,000 websites trying to save 50 cents or something. It's crazy. And what a waste of life. What if, in the midst of looking through the 400th website to save, $1,000 on a car that you're going to buy. I mean, seriously, you just die. Let's just say you died of a heart attack in the midst of all that. Wouldn't that be like such a waste? Wouldn't that feel like such a disappointing way to die? But also, think about the time. I don't know. Sometimes this is totally a side point, but I think about, okay, at a good paying job, how much would I make per hour? how many hours did I actually spend trying to save the $50 on that purchase? It's ridiculous. Even just in a totally worldly way of doing like mathematics for your own like value of your time, it's ridiculous. But even more so in terms of this, there are so many things that we do that we could do, and so many things that we could be doing, which are much more helpful than the things that we do. So this is a quote that I've been saying over and over again because I've taught like 4 retreats in a row the last few weekends here. But there's a famous teacher who I have never had the honor of meeting in person, but whose lectures I've listened to in recordings. Her name is Khandro Rinpoche. She's a Tibetan woman, Buddhist teacher. And one of her students asked her the question, in the West, we're so busy and we don't have much time. So what's the most effective practice we could do in the shortest amount of time? And she answered, yes, I know. You Westerners, you're really busy. And I've been observing your busy lifestyle for many years. But what I come to notice is that the things that you're busy with are things that don't actually need to be done. Most of the things. And so what I want you to think about for yourself is not to say, I don't have time to practice, or I don't have time for Dharma, but instead you should think Dharma is not important to me, because you seem to have time for all these other things in your life. So those are obviously important to you. So, essentially, I think that point comes directly to this point right here, this wasting time or laziness in terms of being attached to lowly pursuits. And just in terms of, I think for most of us who have embarked on this kind of path of spiritual development or whatever the case may be, like spiritual development in general, Buddhist path specifically, whatever your direction may be, we have some identity almost that, yeah, I'm a Dharma practitioner. I'm really going for it. And like we have genuine intentions within ourselves that we really want to do it. Like when we think about our lives and we think about what we want, we're like, yeah, I really want to meditate an hour or 2 hours every day or whatever. I want to do that 2-week retreat, whatever. But then when it comes to the way that actually plays out in life, a lot of us, myself included, many times in my life, don't actually make it the level of priority in our practical day-to-day lives that we think we would, or that we would like to, or that we actually genuinely intend to. So, it's just a matter of really prioritizing, or maybe thinking about your priorities and being realistic about what you want. And if you really want that thing, let's just say it's getting enlightened or whatever, then make it a priority, And, when you combine that also with these contemplations on the certainty of death and the uncertainty of the time of death, it becomes quite apparent, like what's actually going to bring the most benefit, looking at that Netflix series a little bit more, or, shopping for that other thing, or joining a 5th intramural soccer league, or whatever the case, all these things, or committing another hour a day to your Dharma practice. So anyway, it's just something to think about and really start to, I think for a lot of people, it really is just like something that we don't even recognize in ourselves, because we really do have an identity. Like, I'm a spiritual practitioner, I'm a Dharma practitioner, whatever. And then we don't even really notice how much time we waste doing other things that actually, if we stop and think about it, aren't even priorities for us. We recognize them very easily as a waste of time or things that we don't actually care about very much. So anyway, I'm going to answer or come here for a second real quick. Carol said, hey, I'm not saying anyone should follow early bird sleep schedule, but it says people have different circadian rhythms. Some are early birds, other are night owls. Expecting all people to conform to an early bird sleep schedule is not compassionate. Hey, I have no expectation that anyone would do that. I think that people should practice according to their energy, their lifestyle, whatever. I know a lot of people who work nights and other people who just are night people. And I that's not at all what I intended to when I said that statement before about going to sleep earlier and getting up earlier or whatever. That's just in general. I'm really just talking about that if you were to, like, for a person who is trying to be on a morning schedule, staying up an extra 2 hours just to do something kind of meaningless, like watch TV or have that 4th beer or whatever the case may be, isn't actually, like, if you stop and think about your priorities, it's not actually getting you where you want to be. In that instance, like going to bed earlier, getting up earlier would be the better decision. Or if you're a night person, spend that extra 2 hours meditating. That's all I was trying to say. Jessica, will you turn your microphone on instead of?
Okay, Justin, my question was, what was the second laziness? It was like not believing you're worthy to do something, right? Yeah. Okay, so then my question is, would you think it would be helpful, or would you suggest like that people like stair step their way into like that extra hour? I sometimes I guess this is for myself, but also for like friends and other folks who are meditating. Sometimes it's like, oh, I don't think I can meditate an hour, but wait, I do have this extra hour. I'm going to do it. And then they try meditating for an hour when they haven't been practicing. And it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, oh no, I'm terrible at this. I'm going to watch Ted Lasso, which is great.
Yeah, that's totally the case. And, generally when we're absolutely, I would recommend people to stair step their way into it or kind of build up their capacity for practice. And even when we're giving, especially for meditation instructions, then we always say to practice short sessions, but many sessions. And so whatever time you have, let's say you have, 30 minutes, instead of trying to sit 30 minutes all in one go, sit for 5 minutes until you're really nailing that 5 minutes. And when you get really good at sitting for 5 minutes, or until you get really good at sitting for 5 minutes, only try 5 minutes and then take a break, and then do 5 minutes and then take a break, and then do 5 minutes and take a break, and build up until you get really good at 5 minutes before you even try and go for 10 minutes. And so that's one way to stair step up, and also what you said in terms of the overall time of a session, you can stair step up. So start with a half an hour until a half an hour feels comfortable, even if it's broken up into smaller chunks in the middle. So often when we say small sessions, but many sessions, we mean if you have one larger chunk of time, like a half an hour, don't try and sit for the whole half an hour beginning to end, because if you haven't already built up the capacity for that, exactly what you said is going to happen. You're going to get fatigued, you're going to not be successful, and you're going to leave at the end of that meditation feeling defeated. And that defeat at the end of 30 minutes makes you less likely to want to meditate the next time. So kind of part of the function of this short sessions, but many sessions, is to use the time that you are allotting for meditation the most effective way possible, so that at the end of that, you leave with some enthusiasm that drives you forward to want to engage with the next session. So if you're really nailing 5 minutes, then it's easy to want to do another 5 minutes. And then when you extend that up to 7 or 8 minutes and you get really good at that, you want to leave on a good note. I mean, it's not always possible. Sometimes you just have bad sessions, bad weather, you're tired, you ate too much, whatever the case may be. But in general, definitely, one technique is the small sessions within that chunk of time, and then also not to go too long on the overall chunk of time until you're getting more established in the practice. So definitely, I wouldn't recommend people who have never meditated before to just start meditating 2 hours a day. There are also other things that you can do. Dharma practice is not just meditation. I would also highly recommend that people read books like this, and so your Dharma practice could be, okay, I want to commit 2 hours a day of Dharma practice. It could be a half an hour of meditation and an hour and a half of reading. That's also really important. A lot of times, I think a lot of people in Buddhism, but also just in a lot of like Western mindfulness movements, are based almost entirely on meditations that are extracted from the Buddhist tradition. But then what they do is they only take the meditation part out and they ignore all the rest of the whole content of the path. And that whole rest of the content of the path is the thing that actually makes the meditation work to a certain extent. If Ken Rinpoche often jokes around, he says, that guy's a really good meditator, but man, is he a jerk. And if someone is going around and they have no sense of any kind of like ethical restraint or ethical discipline, they're doing a bunch of mean things, they're saying a bunch of mean things, you're creating situations in the world and within yourself that are still provoking a lot of doubt and paranoia and self-worth issues within yourself. That instability of mind is going to make it way harder for you to meditate. So even just the basic like foundation that you build through generosity and ethical discipline and patience and everything, that's actually settling your mind, getting you like less attached and fixated on the objects of your desire, which is like also calming your mind. If you're getting better at not being attached and fixated and desirous of everything, then you're going to have less thoughts of desire breaking your meditation. If you're doing better at dealing with your anger through the practice of the perfection of patience, then those kind of disturbing thoughts are going to be less, and they're going to be stirring your mind less and let you go deeper into the meditation. So all of this is working towards getting to the meditation, and then the meditation joined with wisdom is what would actually liberate you. So when we only focus on just meditation, I don't find that a very successful strategy if you really want to, even in a practical sense. If you want to get good at meditating, I would recommend the rest of the practices, like to go deeper into them, to study them, to engage with them. But especially if you actually believe in this whole kind of quest of enlightenment and the bodhisattva path and all of that, they're indispensable. You can't just meditate your way to enlightenment. It's not going to work. So, and that's not just me. This is like every Buddhist text says that, if you only practice the first 5 of the perfections without wisdom, you wouldn't get enlightened. If you only practiced wisdom without the first 5 perfections, you also wouldn't get enlightened. So mere meditation won't get you enlightened. Mere wisdom won't get you enlightened. The two together. And so to develop wisdom, you have to read books to a certain extent. There are tantric practices, which are more like a direct approach to getting introduced to the idea of wisdom, but that's not for our discussion here. And if you go deeper into some of the, more intellectual or academic or whatever kind of ideas of the approach to wisdom, then that makes those tantric practices much easier to understand in the first place. So if you're interested in going that direction, all of this, the whole path is important, not just meditation. That's my point. Sorry. I went on for a little while there. Essentially, that's the whole thing. But then in the text, it goes through 3 kinds of diligence. And those are, or like 3 things that you would want to be diligent about if you were a bodhisattva. And they are diligence in overcoming your afflictions, diligence in accomplishing virtue, and diligence in working for the welfare of others. And so diligence in getting rid of your afflictions or overcoming your afflictions is, those afflictions, the afflictive thoughts and emotions of attachment, aversion, ignorance, jealousy, pride. There's like the 3 poisons, the 5 poisons. There are all these lists of, afflictive emotions. Those are the source of suffering. So to overcome those, then there are, all kinds of practices that you could do, like engaging in ethical discipline, like meditating and trying to gain the wisdom of selflessness and so forth. So that's one aspect of diligence, is diligence in overcoming your afflictive mental states or your afflictive emotions. The second one is diligence in accomplishing virtue. And basically that just means that you're diligent about your Dharma practice in general. You're diligent about your whole spiritual path, all the aspects of that. So it's these are subtle distinctions. They're more or less the same thing. If you want to overcome affliction, you have to apply yourself to the path. So one is just talking about from the perspective of overcoming your negativity, and one is talking about it from the perspective of maybe more like gaining wisdom or something like that. And then the third one is enthusiastic diligence. So that just means, this is another subcategory. There are so many subcategories that I'm skipping through, and then I overlapped, because if you go into in the middle of diligence in getting rid of affliction, or in diligence in accomplishing virtue, there's another subcategory of like the 7 kinds of ways of doing that, So let's forget about that. The third one, diligence in working for the welfare of others. That is exactly what it sounds like. So there's one aspect of this bodhisattva practice is when you talk about generosity and you talk about patience. Patience is an unaffected or a undisturbed mind. It's kind of the opposite of anger. And diligence is overcoming your covetousness. And you can't practice either of those if there isn't someone who needs your help, or if there isn't someone for you to get angry at and then learn to get over your anger. So from a certain perspective, there is this diligence at helping others, could be practicing patience, practicing generosity. It's also keeping that bodhisattva intention, the intention to liberate all beings and free them from suffering, and using that as the intention and the power or the force for driving forward your practice. Because there's another kind of discussion in these bodhisattva texts when they talk about, right now, to take an example, we are like a mother with no hands whose only child has been carried away by a river. So like we're helpless. We're desperately sad, desperately compassionate that child is suffering and being carried away by this torrent of suffering, but we actually don't have the power to do anything about it. So from one perspective, the diligence of wanting to work for others is not necessarily actually going out and trying to do everything for other people, but it's actually trying to, in the example, grow some hands. Basically, it's like we have to develop the power to be able to help people on a larger scale, which means we have to develop meditative concentration, wisdom, the power of generosity, the power of patience. All of these aspects of the 6 perfections are going to make us a more effective being, or a more effective teacher, a more effective leader, a more effective helper, whatever the case may be. So like right now, even if we want to help, often our sense of help is so full of expectations. We expect people to do something specific with the help that we give them, or use it in a way that we find appropriate. We regret our good deeds if they don't bring the results that we were hoping for, and all kinds of things like this. So, we have to develop a greater capacity to not only not get frustrated while we're trying to do some help, because things don't always go your way, but to not have this kind of attachment to a certain outcome and so forth. These are, in the text, they talk about that there are all kinds of things that would obstruct us as an ordinary person from actually doing anything significant in terms of helping others. And those are that we would get angry when things don't go our way, that we're attached to a fixed outcome, those kind of things. So as we progress, as we develop these practices of the 6 perfections, we're less attached to a fixed outcome. We're more giving and generous. We're more able to not be attached to wanting it to be our way. We're less likely to get angry. We're more enthusiastic about doing it. We're more calm through the meditative concentration, and we have more wisdom to understand what's actually going to be beneficial or helpful or harmful through wisdom. So all of these aspects, are all parts of helping others. And so helping others, you shouldn't think of it in the limited perspective of, I'm going to go out and carry this thing for you, or I'm going to fix your life, or I'm going to teach you Dharma, or something like that. From a Bodhisattva perspective, like all of your practice is also subsumed within the diligence of working for others.